What's up, guys? Code Doug here, and today we're going to be breaking down Brad Owen's championship run at the highest stakes buy-in at the Lodge Championship Series. Not only are we going to look at the path to victory for Brad, but we're also going to be breaking down some of the hands and checking, do we think Brad played well in some of these spots? Coming into the gate here, Brad is actually one of the shortest, he's actually the shortest stack coming into this final table, so lots of work to get done here for Brad. The first hand we see here for Brad that is of significance is a hand where the low jack opens and Brad looks down at ace jack in on the button. Now, in this situation with ace jack, both 3-betting and calling are both completely viable. And typically you want to be doing a little bit of both in these spots. The button, obviously the best place to be playing some hands. Brad does decide to go ahead and call. Action now folds to the big blind, looks down at king 9 suited and decides to squeeze in and jam. Maybe slightly loose here from the big blind, but perhaps he thinks that the ranges are a bit too wide for his opponents. Perhaps he has some reads. It's really hard to say what his exact logic would be. Also, it's possible that this is correct at some very low frequency of the time. The hijack folds back over to Brad, and this is a really interesting spot now for Brad. Ace jack for about 30 big blinds here. Is this really a spot that you're particularly excited to call a jam? Probably not, but at the same time, when you have ace jack and your opponent can be squeezing a lot of looser hands, he only has 30 big blinds to start this hand. This is a situation where I think some players might look just to let it go, but Brad actually figures it out and makes the correct call, getting it in far ahead here against king 9 suited. Taking a look quickly at the solution for what you should be doing here without ICM considerations, we can see that the button actually almost always is flatting here facing this open. So certainly a good play from Brad here to be calling with ace jack on the button. When you do call and then the small blind folds, let's say that the big blind jams and the hijack folds, what are you supposed to do with ace jack? We can see ace jack is the actual cutoff point, and you're always calling with ace jack and folding ace 10. So Brad finding a very nice call here on the button, finding a very nice call versus jam, facing this jam, and being one notch higher than what you would have to fold. So really well played hand from Brad here, and he does end up taking this pot down as we move forward in the tournament, now down to 5-handed. By the way, if you want to start training your game and checking solutions over at Lucid, you can do so with Code Doug. That's right. Finally, Code Doug is good for something other than registering at Club WBT Gold. Did I just do 2 ads at once? I think I just did. Anyway, Code Doug will get you 10% off of your Lucid subscription. So head on over now if you want to improve your game at the link below. All right, so back to the action. Let's go ahead. Brad now with a bit more of a stack, and we enter one of the coolers of this tournament. Our next hand is at a $5,000 big blind, and we have made the money. All of the players are guaranteed to be making some serious money here, at least $12,000 going to 4th place, all the way up to $60,000 for the winner. Bogdan, our current short stack, opens up the button. Pocket 5 is obviously the standard play here. And now Son in the small blind looks down at king queen. You can 3-bet or call here. They're both reasonable options. And Son decides just to call. To the big blind now, Brad Owen looks down, king deuce suited. This is a hand you probably just want to be calling pre-flop, and he does decide to call, and we take a flop. Action flop here. We have king queen 6, 2 spades. Son flops top 2, Brad flops top pair, and the second nut flush draw. Bogdan with the under pair to the board, probably not looking to take this one down. Action checks to the button, as it always should, and Bogdan decides to check it back. I like this play from Bogdan. I think that this hand, probably one you're just going to check and look to give up on later streets. Anyway, once Bogdan checks back, we take a turn, and oh boy, is it a doozy with the deuce coming in on the turn. Now Brad has top and bottom and a flush draw. Son has top 2. We have a spot with monsters here in such a short stack situation. Very likely that someone's going to get stacked. Son now with king queen, he could decide to bet, he could decide to check raise. I think that they're both totally fine. He decides to trap it this time and just check it on over. Brad now with top and bottom, a kind of similar situation to Son, where I don't mind slow playing, but I probably do prefer just to bet. You can get plenty of value from other hands from your opponents, and of course your hand is extremely strong. Brad goes ahead and bets here on the turn for about a 40% pot size. Bogdan gets out of the way, and now back over to Son top 2. I think it's important to mainly be check raising here. You want to be able to check raise and put your opponent all in on the river. Son obliges and check raises it up. making it about $60,000 to go here on the turn. And now back over to Brad Owen. I think in this situation for Brad, I don't see a lot of reason to raise again. If your opponent's bluffing, you want to keep them in there. And if you get every last dollar into this pot right now, there's probably a pretty good chance you're going to be beat. So it makes sense to me that you'd probably always want to be calling here, particularly because you have a deuce. When you have a deuce, it's even more likely your opponent is bluffing, so you can set the trap, and really there's not many rivers that you're afraid of. Perhaps a queen or a 6 would suck, right? Because now your deuce is counterfeit, but at the same time, those cards actually aren't even that bad. The reason is because your opponent is either bluffing or has 2 pair or better himself. So in that situation, the board pairing actually removes combinations of hands that have you beat. Regardless, I like calling here. Brad does decide to call, and we take a river. If you're going to win a poker tournament, you're going to need some good fortune, and Brad certainly does get some here with a board pairing deuce, giving Brad a full house. Now, normally when we break down hands, there's a lot to think about, but in this spot, not so much.
The river.
Call.
One is all in, 3 calls. Kings and queens.
Oh my God.
All in. A snap from Brad. What a cooler.
I really do like Brad calling all in with the full house. I think it's the right play. Our next hand is down to 3-handed. Brad has run up a good-sized chip lead here, and the action folds to the small blind, who looks down at ace-queen offsuit on a 60-blind stack. Now, in this situation, the small blind is going to want to be calling a lot of hands because there is an ante, but you do want to have a raise range as well. This looks like a good play from Bogdan. Over to Brad, looks down. Pocket Cowboys, definitely going to want to 3-bet this. You are too deep to want to be turning this hand into a slow play here pre-flop. When you are really short stacked in these tournament spots, you might want to just call this sometimes and trap your opponent. But in this situation, I definitely like a 3-bet, which Brad goes for, making it $55,000 to go. Back to Bogdan, ace-queen off. I think in this situation, you primarily want to be calling. We're going to look at the solver in a sec on this, but I do think calling makes sense. If you 4-bet, you don't really want to put 60 blinds in with ace-queen, and you really don't want to be 4-bet folding as well. So I do like his decision to go ahead and just call. They do take a flop of king 5-3, 3 hearts. Both players get some pretty good hands on the flop. Obviously, Brad top set huge, but any heart will make it 1 to a flush, so some concern there. And Bogdan with the second nut flush draw and some kind of good blockers here with ace-queen. You're blocking hands like ace-queen, king-queen, aces, and of course some queen-high flushes or flush draws as well. Bogdan now checks to Brad with pocket kings, and I think in this situation on the flop, you're mainly going to want to be betting, and he does decide to go for a very small flop bet. This seems like the best play, although I would say you probably want to be checking. The solver frequently will trap on these flush draw boards. I don't mind betting, definitely going to happen some of the time, but checking is certainly good as well. Now over to Bogdan with ace-queen. Another kind of tough spot for Bogdan where you probably want to be raising occasionally, but if you raise and get 3-bet, what are you going to do? You're kind of in no man's land. I'd probably end up having to fold if it's a large size or maybe float one for a small size. So I don't mind the idea of mainly calling, but sometimes putting in a small raise. In this particular instance, Bogdan decides to go for a call, does make the call, and we take a turn, which is an offsuit 5, giving Brad Owen top boat. Bogdan checks once again. And now in this situation, you know, this is kind of a classic trap spot, at least for me, where when I end up with these top boats, I try to trap them because I'm not really afraid of any rivers, and I want to allow my opponent a chance to stab the river. Brad decides that's not how he's going to play this one, though, and does decide to barrel the turn, setting up for a river jam. He bets a little under 1/3 pot, or right just about 1/3 pot here on the turn. And now back over to Bogdan with the ace-queen. This situation just gets tougher and tougher for Bogdan. I still am not totally sure what he should be doing. I am a little bit interested to see what the solver will do here, but my hunch is that you're probably going to have to call at least one more here. Again, you do have that queen of hearts, so you have some good equity against hands like ace-king, hands like aces, no heart, hands like perhaps if he has queens, things like that. So there are definitely hands that you have the equity to call versus, but again, you're not particularly thrilled by it. Bogdan ultimately does call. We take a river. It's the 7 of diamonds. The board bricks out. Bogdan checks, and now Brad has a pretty clear hand to jam with. I don't really see any other option for Brad. He does decide to go all in. And now back over to Bogdan, and once again, a very tough spot. So When you see this hand and you're thinking, why is he considering calling? Well, let's think about this. What's the worst hand that Brad's going to go all in with? It's probably something like king, queen, king, jack, maybe, probably not. So Brad has king, queen, or better. When you have ace, queen, you block king, queen, you block ace, king, you block ace, ace, you block queen high flushes, you block ace 5 suited. You can't have ace 5 of diamonds, right? Because you have the ace diamonds. His hand is actually has some really nice call properties. And even though Bogdan does end up making the call here and is incorrect, I can see what he's thinking, which is my hand blocks tons of the good hands my opponent can have. And a 3-bet in a blind versus blind scenario is quite polar. There's a lot of hands that can be bluffing in this situation. So, I think in these spots, it's pretty easy for people to play armchair quarterback and say, oh, this is a bad call when they're up against top boat. But I think that this call is you probably want to fold. But the hand does have some great properties, and I think it's cool to see players being willing to go with, maybe either some reads or some of the properties of their hand, and be willing to make big call downs. Because as we all know, big call downs do tend to be popular.
Yeah, this guy's something else, man. This guy is a special talent. That was wild.
That was great.
We're going to quickly look at 50 big blind MTT here. Again, no ICM considerations. We're just looking at chip EV. So small blind with ace queen off. You actually do like to limp a good amount of the time here, but raising, of course, also fine. Over to the big blind now with kings. You are always 3-betting, so definitely a good play here from Brad. Back over to Bogdan with the ace queen. It actually likes to jam ace queen quite frequently here. It does not like calling pre-flop. Again, this is on 50 blinds, so slightly shallower, but I imagine the solution is going to be similar. Ace jack does do a good amount of calling, so it's definitely likely that at 60 blinds, ace queen does start to call. Now we put in the flop king 5-3 all of hearts and take a look here at the solution. So on the king 5-3 of hearts, we actually see some kind of crazy stuff going on. So first off, there's a bunch of leading that happens here on this flop, which is crazy. You call a 3-bet king high flop, you would think you'd be checking your range, but there's actually a pretty good reason why this is the case. We see the kinds of hands that are calling a 3-bet. We see lots of suited hands, suited aces, suited kings, suited Broadway, 10-9 suited, 6-5 suited, 7-6 suited. Lots of suited hands are calling this 3-bet. And so there are lots of hands with flushes in the calling 3-bet player's range, as well as hands like middle pocket pairs. When we go over to the player that's 3-betting here, and this is what I was talking about pre-flop, we see a really high degree of polarization. We see that the bluff 3-bets are lots of these offsuit bad hands, and the good 3-bets are 10s plus ace queen. And the reason is because when you 3-bet small, your opponent's going to be jamming on you a good portion of the time, and so you want your range to be polarized when you 3-bet. Brad does decide to bet the flop here with pocket kings. We do see that checking is the main line. Betting does happen some, so certainly both players are good. But checking is nice on these monotone boards. The overall bet frequency is quite low, and this board is not as good for the 3-betting player as one might imagine. Now back over to to Bogdan with ace queen. How does he want to play it facing this bet? You don't really have ace queen off here, so we're going to look at ace jack off for some inspiration. And you can see there is a ton of check raising that happens here. There is a small amount of check call, but check calling is not really the strategy you end up wanting to go with because you do have a good amount of kings. You don't have that many big blinds. And then also you do have a good portion of flushes as well as high flush draw hands. So Bogdan does make the call, and now let's look at the board pairing turn so we can get an idea for how we would want to be playing this when the board pairs the turn. Bogdan checks, and now over to Brad Owen's range. We actually see that kings is basically always betting here on the turn, which I find pretty interesting. It's nice that Brad found this bet here on the turn. Maybe you shouldn't be betting the flop all that much, but when you do bet, you do continue barreling. I think the reason is because your opponent's actually a little more polarized when they check call the flop on these shorter stacks. And so you don't block as many value bets as one might think. And there are plenty of hands like flushes or 8s or 10s with a heart that might end up wanting to call the turn. So this is actually a really nice spot to bet the turn. Trapping is still fine. The solver does do it some of the time. But this is a nice spot to be barreling the turn when you have this value bet for Brad. Back over to Bogdan now with ace jack, and we can see that ace jack is mainly calling here when he has ace jack jack of hearts. So again, Ace Jack Jack of Hearts is similar to Ace Queen. Not to get too nerdy here, but the point is this call on the turn is quite good when you have the Jack of Hearts or Queen of Hearts. Okay, does make the call, and then we get that offsuit 7 river. And now we're going to see what the solver does when we face this river. So check. Obviously, Brad's going to be going all in with kings. The worst hand he would go all in here, you're supposed to go all in with queens for value here some, which is pretty nuts, and some 10s for value, my lord. And then your bluffs end up being hands like ace 4 off, queen 4 off, 10-8 off with a heart, 10-6 off with a heart. Lots of hands that ace queen unblocks. When the in-position player goes all in, ace queen now, check. Sorry, small blind check. Big blind goes all in. And we actually see ace jack with the Jack of Hearts does call this jam. So I'm going to go out on a limb, guys. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Bogdan actually played this hand really well. Because you unblock those bluffs, you do block the value bets. It's tough to always find these exact combos, but I think this is one that was a pretty nicely played hand from Bogdan. Now, moving on to our last hand here, and before we do, I want to let you guys know that I am going to be making $100,000 in 1 month at 3-6 heads up. It's going to start on March 4th, not 3rd, March 4th at 8 a.m. I realized on the 3rd I actually have a charity event I have to go to, so we're starting it 1 day later, and it will conclude on April 5th. We begin the journey to make $100,000 in 1 month, and I'm giving it all away to you guys. All you have to do is sign up and deposit using code Doug. Okay, let's go ahead and jump back into the action. Back to the action. We are down to heads up, and we have quite an interesting hand here. Brad looks down on about 30 big blinds effective. He has the chip lead with queen 8. Decides to limp in. This hand likes some of both. Raising is fine, limping is fine. They're both totally reasonable plays. And TM looks down at king 5. This is the kind of hand you typically just want to check. Brad limps, TM checks, and we take a flop. What's cool about this hand, both players missed this board pretty tremendously with the Jack 6-4 2 diamonds. But in heads up, you have to go out there and fight for pots. And TM gets the party started with a quick flop bet here. I don't like this bet. I looked it up. In theory, you never have bets here. So, you know, perhaps TM thinks if he just bets this flop, he takes it down a lot. You get your opponent off with some hands that might float you or bluff themselves. But unfortunately for TM, Brad has no such plan and does decide to call. There's no solver solution here because this hand doesn't happen in theory. Why did Brad call? Well, I think he has a diamond, so he's going to try and float here and take it away on later streets. Obviously, either one of his pairs could be fairly good. So he decides just to call here. It's close. I could see either option being fine. The turn comes a 4, and this 3 I really don't like from TM. He once again bets very large on the turn, 30,000 to go. You're not representing much anymore because you're not going to be leading a 4 on the flop. So this just looks like a bluff. And Brad very much correctly realizes this and raises the turn, thinking TM's not really credibly representing anything here. What hand would flop bet turn that's good? He's probably not going to have a boat. That'd probably check. Not going to have trips. That probably checks the flop. So this is not a standard play from Brad, but I think he's really excellently realizing that this is a weak hand from TM, and he does decide to raise it to $70,000 here. Sorry, 70,000 chips instead of a river jam for a small percentage of pot. You know, this is probably not a play that I would make. I'd probably just fold. But if you have a strong read, you can go for it, and it was absolutely on the money here. So a very nice play from Brad here to pick up some chips going into the end of this tournament. The actual last hand of this tournament, well, it's not a particularly interesting one as ace 5 and king queen get all in pre-flop. And frankly, guys, usually the last hand of a tournament tends to be something like this, where two hands are both decent, the blinds are getting big, and we put in all of the chips. And all Brad needs to do is hold with his ace 5 to take down the $5,000 LCS high roller.
All in from Brad and a call from TM. Is this it? TM's all in.
Good luck, good luck. Thanks, man.
For his tournament life, Brad just has to fade, and he will be the LCS high roller champion. Let's go to the runouts. Very safe start for Brad. A king or a queen for TM, and it doesn't come
With this victory under his belt, what's next for Brad Owen? Well, I do believe he's going to be playing another high-stakes tournament at the Lodge. The LCS main event is in full swing, $1 million guaranteed. And I'm pretty sure Brad will be playing that as well. So hopefully he can make a deep run in that one. Giant prize pool if you've not heard about this tournament. Make sure to head on down to the Lodge if you like high-stakes tournaments for lots of money. I'm going to be going there myself. I'll see you guys later. Thanks for tuning in today. Hit the subscribe button. And again, 8 a.m. on March 4th, Tuesday, the challenge begins to win $100,000 that I'm giving to you guys. Thanks.